All right, good morning, my friends. Back this up so I can see everybody. Yeah, let's do that one. Okay. Well, no, come back. There we go. So this morning, I am speaking on human trafficking and the gospel, which, so starting off, this is one of the easiest things to talk about and one of the hardest things. And it's easy because I think we can all agree at the get-go that human trafficking is bad. So we've covered that, right? And Jesus is probably against it. So that part is not something that we need to spend a lot of time on, right? But the hard part is that there's a lot that goes on with human trafficking, and I apologize, I've had a cold all week. There's a lot that goes on with human trafficking, and I think you guys may have noticed, if you've been here week to week, each and every one of these things that's up here, we could spend an entire semester on. And this one is no different. We could spend weeks on this, taking apart human trafficking, really getting to the heart of it and understanding what's going on with it, and really trying to dig in deep to it. So today we're going to dig in as deep as we can in the time that we have, but we will not obviously get to all of the heart of the gospel in human trafficking. But I wanted to start with just a short clip. So the Lord brought human trafficking and the abuse of humans, especially children, really burdened my heart with that back in, I'm just going to hit this mic all the time, back in about 2004. I had a friend who had been to Uganda, and she came back from Uganda and she said, guys, I've got to share this story with you. I've got to share this this thing that's happening over in Uganda. And she started to share this story of these child soldiers who were being literally stolen from their homes and forced to fight by rebel soldiers living in the jungle in Uganda, in the bush. And she started to share this story with us, and she said, I'm going to have a night where I'm going to show this documentary, and I would love it if you guys would come just to support us and to show us. And the documentary, you may have heard of the documentary of the group Invisible Children. Who's heard of that? So Invisible Children, again, 10 years ago, Invisible Children was huge. They their leader had basically a mental breakdown because he was so burdened with this, and so Invisible Children over the years has become less and less influential and powerful. They're still doing great work, but they suffered some setbacks. But when they first got started, these were young. They were college guys who actually went over to the Sudan with the idea of they knew that there was a war going on and they wanted to do a documentary on it. And they literally got there and they could not find the war, which is shocking when you go looking for war and it's not there. And they spent a week trying to figure out where this war was and what was going on. And they eventually were told, hey, if you're looking to do a story, forget about that. Everybody knows about that. Why don't you go to this bus station tonight? And they went to a bus station, and when they got to this bus station, they found hundreds of children in the bus station sleeping in the bus station. And they were like, what is going on? So they went and they found somebody who knew what was going on. They said, well, here's the deal. Every night, the LRA, which was this rebel army, comes into these villages all around this town, and they steal children. And they take young boys and young girls, mostly young boys, and they take them out and they make them into child soldiers. And so the villages, unable to stop this from happening, have started sending their children to this bus station to sleep because there's safety in numbers. Right? And this idea was if they're all in one spot, then we can watch over them all here, and they'll be safer. So these guys suddenly realize that there's this huge event going on where children are being taken and forced into soldiering for this war. And they start doing this documentary, and they put together and they meet all these kids who have either they've been soldiers or their families have been made into soldiers, and they do this whole documentary. I'm watching this documentary, and more and more I'm feeling like, man, this is this is terrible, this is awful, this is something that has to be done. And then this clip that I'm going to show you came up. And this kid that you're about to see, his brother was taken by the LRA and was made to be a soldier. And throughout the documentary, they talk to him a little bit about his brother, and he's always talking really tough. And he's always saying, we do what we do, we survive, we keep moving on. In this clip right here, he had just gotten done saying, it actually, at this point in my life, would be better that you kill me now than I continue living, because I don't have any food, I don't have any clothes, I don't have anybody looking after me. But he's saying it tough. There's no emotion. He's just, this is the way life is, and we're going to deal with it, right? And so then, while they're filming, he decides to talk about his brother, and that's where we jump in on this. So can we move that up a little, Chris? Because the words are... There we go. Okay. Can we close those blinds so we get a little less...
Even now. On the last night we spent with Jacob and Thomas, they started talking about their brother who was murdered by the rebels. We asked Jacob what he'd say if his brother was still here.
I will tell you that I love you, but now I miss you. So it is better when we meet. We are going, even if we are not going to meet, but we may meet in heaven. You see. So it is better. I will not talk much. I will start something. Because if I saw my brother once again, I don't.
So I'm watching this documentary, and that scene comes up, and it still gets me. And you see this kid who his world has been completely crushed, and that cry is a cry from someone who has seen the worst and who has tried to stand up to it, but when he finally has a moment to be vulnerable and he feels safe with these guys because they've been with him for weeks now. He completely breaks down. So I saw that, and it rocked my world, and it changed my whole world perspective. I knew that there were people suffering, and that there were people who were taking advantage of other people and hurting people and all of that. I knew in my head that was happening. When I saw that, it changed my heart. It broke my heart, and it broke my heart in a way that I had to turn to the Lord and say, Lord, what do we do about this? How do we stop this? And that led me down a path that has led to where I am today as an attorney. It led me down this path of learning back in 2004 that human trafficking was a real thing, right? Because again, and back in 2004, it wasn't very well known at all, right? Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, the United States and other places started to kind of become aware that slavery, which we thought was abolished and done with in the world, was actually not only still here, but thriving. That slavery was actually building and becoming more and more and more of a thing. And so the legislatures and activist groups started to rise up and say, we need to figure out what to do about this. We need to figure out how to stop it. And so that was, again, back in 2000, 2004, that was when I kind of started to come along and see this. And so this is something that I am actually very passionate about. It's the reason I became an attorney, was because I wanted to figure out how to fight. And I actually was at a conference at a group that I really admire and really love, and I went up and spoke to the speaker, and I said, I want to do what I can do. What do you need? And he told me, and this was back in like 2007 or 8, maybe 9. He said, what we need is attorneys. We need lawyers who can get in there and change the laws and help us in that way. worldwide and domestic. And so I was like, great. There's a whole story that goes into why I didn't immediately go to law school, mostly because I'm scared and lazy. And but eventually, I got into law school and got through that. And the whole time I was like, Lord, I'm going to go work for IJM. I'm going to go work for somebody to really fight this human trafficking. And the crazy thing is, the Lord has said, nope, you're going to actually help people in Kansas City and do all these things. But the passion and the desire to use my life to stop human trafficking has continued. And so today, what we're going to talk about is, I'm not going to talk to you about, oh, here's how people get into human trafficking, here's how it all happens. If you want to know more, if you're like, well, I would actually like to know how people actually end up being trafficked and how all that works, I would love to go and sit down with you and talk to you all about that. And we can walk through all the multiple ways that human trafficking can occur and all of that. That's not the heart of this talk. This talk, we're going to talk about what our reaction to human trafficking should be, because, like I say, I think we're all pretty well convinced that it's happening and that we don't want it to happen anymore, right? So we're going to look at the counterculture of Christianity as it butts up against human trafficking. All right, and I identified three things that I think we want to look at. Some of these ideas were taken from the Counterculture book that we're going through by David Platt. Some of these I kind of added to from him. So first off, again, we are a gospel-centered. If we're looking at the world through gospel-centered eyes, then we have to figure out what does that mean? What does it mean? How would Jesus look at human trafficking? And again, we all agree Jesus would say human trafficking is bad. We should stop it. Right? But how would how would we look at that? So the first thing I want to say is that we, as followers of Christ, have eyes that see the world differently. Right? When we look at Jesus' life, what we see is that Jesus, when he encountered people day to day, he saw them differently than the rest of the world. What society saw as people who were lost, who were worthless, who were beyond repair, who were beyond help, those were the people that Jesus said, man, I want to spend my time with you, right? So there's lots of situations where we see this. In Mark chapter 2, you see Jesus come into town, and he says, I'm going to go eat with the tax collectors, right? And we all know that in the Bible, the tax collectors are like the worst of the worst people, right? They're the bad guys. They're people who society saw as useless, as greedy, as kind of, and they weren't even people who were born into trouble, but they were seen as people who brought this lifestyle on themselves. They chose to be tax collectors. They chose to be crooked as tax collectors. And so tax collectors were people who were beyond redemption. Jesus comes into town. He says, I'm going to go eat with them. And the Pharisees and all the religious leaders go, you can't go eat with them. What are you doing? Why would you rather eat with them than with us? We're the righteous people in town. And Jesus says, it's not the healthy who need doctors, but the sick. I did not come for the righteous, but for the sinners. Right? So Jesus immediately walks into town and identifies, these are the people that everybody says are beyond hope. They're the ones I'm going to go eat with. In John 4, you see Jesus encounter a Samaritan woman at the well, right? Most of us probably know the story of Jesus at the well, with the woman at the well, where Jesus literally says, hey, I know everything about your life, and I'm telling you that if you'll come and follow me, I can give you a life that is more fulfilling than anything you've ever had. Your life up to this point is not fulfilled. I can fulfill it. And this woman went away and told everybody she met. She said, he told me everything I ever did. And through that, people came to Christ, right? Because Jesus saw this woman not as a broken, useless woman who was an outcast from society and someone he should give up on. He saw her as someone who, hey, if I can put my light in your world, if I can put my sustenance to you, you will be a fulfilled human. In Luke 19, we see a little man named Zacchaeus who climbs a tree because he wants to see Jesus, but he's tiny. And so he goes up in a tree, and literally everyone else is ignoring him, right? He's this short little guy. He's a tax collector. He's a jerk. He's screwed a lot of people out of a lot of money. So everyone's like, who cares about Zacchaeus? Let him climb a tree. We're not going to give him any space to see Jesus. He doesn't get to be part of our society. He can sit in a tree, and he can watch from up there. Jesus immediately identifies the outcast and goes up to him and says, hey, Zacchaeus, come down from the tree because I need to eat with you tonight. Again, what? You can't go eat with him? He's the worst part of our society. Jesus says, this is the guy who I'm going to spend my time with. And because of his interaction with Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus actually decides he's going to pay back everyone he's ever cheated. He's going to give all the money back that he's ever taken. So these are just three small examples of how Jesus takes over, or how Jesus sees things differently. And if we are going to interact with human trafficking, the first thing that we have to do is see through different eyes. We have to see through the Lord's eyes into what's going on. So one of the things that happened when human trafficking first kind of came on the map was you had a lot of people who saw prostitutes and people in pornography, strippers, people who were in the sex world. They saw them all as degenerates, as criminals. They said, look, if you are in prostitution on the street, it's obvious that there's some part of you that wanted to be there. And so we're going to arrest you. We're going to give you criminal records. We're going to make it so that you are not really part of our society because there's something dirty and wrong with you. Well, the more that we dug into the world of human trafficking, the more we realized there were a lot of these people who had absolutely no control over their being there. They had absolutely no control over why they were on the street selling their bodies. They might have even not had any control over why they were making pornographic movies. They had no control over whether or not they chose to go and be a stripper in a strip club. Someone else was controlling their lives and telling them, you have to do this, or I'll kill you, or I'll hurt your family, or I'll tear down your world. It was the only option they saw to survive. Now, one of the problems that we've had in fighting human trafficking is not just the getting over that on the legal side, right? Now we have laws that actually say, hey, if you are, and I'll define human trafficking in a moment, but we have laws that actually say if you are forced into any of these acts at any point, then you have been trafficked, right? On the flip side, because, and again, I'll get into some more details on human trafficking in a minute, but on the flip side, we tend to focus on the sex trafficking side because I think it's the one that really gets up in our face and shocks us. But the fact is that there are more people trafficked for labor. There are more labor slaves in the world there's 40% more than sex slaves, right? So there's, where's my numbers here? So there's 20.9 million trafficking victims in the world, and that's an estimate because, again, trafficking, it's not really something where it's like, when we say, hey, are you trafficking? People are like, yeah, we're like, okay, cool, counted, right? We're learning how to count trafficking. It's hard. We basically only know what we can see, and we only see when people come forward, right? So it's a hard number to get. But 20.9 million is the estimate. Of that 20.9 million, 68% are actually forced labor slaves. 68%. 22% are sexually exploited slaves, and 10% are people who are slaves to the state government, right? So in countries, there are actually still countries out there that enslave their people, that say, you owe us a debt, we're going to make you pay it off through labor, basically for the rest of your life. That's 10%. So total, really, there's this 78% of people are labor slaves. 22% are sex slaves. So again, so we have this idea, and in this country we have this idea that, okay, we see migrant workers, we see people who are in labor industries, we see people who don't speak English, we see people who do speak English, but for whatever reason in our minds, we've set them apart as, oh, that's the labor force of America. That's the people who we don't even think about them, right? We sit down at our tables to eat our food, and we don't think, I wonder who picked this food, right? We put on our cotton shirts, we don't think, I wonder who picked this cotton. I wonder who made these shirts. I wonder who made the stuff that we pick up our phones, we get on our phones. Who made the electrical parts inside of our phones? We don't think about that, right? They're an invisible and marginalized people. But the fact is that here in the United States, in very recent years, there have been huge cases against farmers who own vast parts of land, vast areas of land, who instead of employing and paying people a wage, use immigration. They use marginalization. They use all of these things that push people to the edges of society. And they use that to their advantage so that they can enslave people to work their farms so they don't have to pay them. This didn't happen 100 years ago. This didn't happen pre-Civil War. This happened 10 years ago. In the last 10 years, there has been a huge case. Actually, there have been several. But there's one really huge case where two brothers owned lots of land and they were buying slaves left and right. They would get people to bring illegal immigrants into the country, and as soon as they showed up, they would take those immigrants' passports. They would take all of their identification, and they would say, "You owe us for bringing you into the country, and you're going to work it off. And if you try to run, the police are going to shoot you. And if you try to ask for help, no one here likes you or wants to help you." And to drive home their point, if somebody did try to run away, they would murder them, and no one noticed or cared. The only reason this case came to be known was because finally, two guys got scared, they ran away, and they found an authority, and they took the chance. They assumed that they were going to be beaten, maybe even killed, and definitely sent back to their home country with no identification, no money, no anything. But they said, that we don't care because we're watching our friends get murdered. And so they found the police. Luckily, they found a police officer who was willing to help them, and they brought the case. So we as Christians are called to see things differently, through different eyes. And one of the ways that we have to see things differently is we have to step away from this culture of there are minimalized people who we don't notice every day. There are minimalized people who serve us every day, who make our things, who do all of that, and we just ignore them. We just assume it's all good. It has to be good, right? Because everything's fine in my life, so everything should be fine in theirs. We have to ask the Lord to show us through different eyes those people who are in need. Those people who need us to step in and advocate for them. One part of this is we have to get angry, right? A lot of times in Christianity we talk about, well, you don't want to get angry. Anger is a sin. You can't get... Jesus got angry. Jesus got angry when things were unrighteous. Jesus got angry when people used their position to oppress or hurt other people. That was when Jesus got angry. And we, as Christ followers, looking at the world through Christ's eyes, when we see injustice, we should be infuriated. We should be livid with how people are being treated. And we'll talk in a minute about what we should do about these traffickers and these people who use slaves. We'll talk about that. But the first thing is we've got to get angry. And then we have to turn that anger over to the Lord. We have to ask the Lord, okay, Lord, what do I do with this anger? I'm furious. I can't go flip tables like Jesus did because there's no tables where they hide all the trafficked people behind. So what do I do? What's my table flipping? The second thing we have is we are called to a higher standard of awareness and abstinence as followers of Christ. In Matthew 5:22 through 28, Jesus says, "You have heard it said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman and lusts after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." We have to start asking the questions, are we living up to the standard of Christ in our heart? And I read that, the part about sex, because we're going to talk about sex trafficking in a minute, but this applies not just to that. This applies to that labor force. Do we know that the clothes we wear weren't made by slaves? Do we know that the food we eat was not made by slaves? Do we know that the products that we use, the phones, the electronics, were not made by slaves? The answer, guys, is no, we don't. The answer is we can try, but it's really hard. All right, but there are tools we can use. Chris, can you pull up the list? Yeah. So there are some tools that we can use. This is off of the... oh no, it died. This is off of the U.S. government website. There. Oh, come back to me. It's from the United States Department of Labor, and this is actually a list of goods that they know are produced by child labor or forced labor, and it's done by country. And so what Chris pulled up here is, it disappeared. Chris pulled up rice, right? So we all eat rice. We go to Chipotle, we eat rice all the time, right? Here's countries where we know that the rice produced out of these countries is likely produced by child or forced labor, right? So what does this mean? this means that that as part of our following of Christ and part of our being more aware and part of our being called to a higher calling means that we have to look at the food we eat. And when we go to the store and we buy rice, we need to look and say, is this rice from Brazil? And if it's from Brazil, do I have a guarantee that a child was not sent into a field to pick this? And if a child was sent into the field to pick this, do I need to buy this rice? That I will fight for you because you are a child of God. So I crammed a lot into a very short time and still went over. And I would love to talk to you guys more about human trafficking and more of what you can do personally. I had a bunch of sites that I had Chris pull up. You can go to Polaris Project, polarisproject.org. This shows this is human trafficking in the United States. This is concentration areas. There's a lot of facts there that you can learn. There's a lot of things. Polaris is great if you want to learn what the laws of Kansas and Missouri are that actually deal with trafficking. You can learn it from there. You can read the laws. I didn't even read the definition of trafficking in the end, but you can read what the legal definition of trafficking is. You can go to this slave-free companies. This will show you companies that you don't. So Patagonia, buy Patagonia because you don't have to worry because they don't use slavery in the making of their things, the material. So there's places you can go, and this is inslaverynow.org. So you can go there and check out. Okay, what is safe for me to buy that I don't have to sit there and really worry about. And then, the site that I showed you at the beginning that showed the places that maybe aren't so great. There's a lot of resources out there if you want to say, man, I want to take a stand against human trafficking in a real and practical way. But then we also have to be looking through the eyes of the Lord to say, okay, how does the Lord redeem and stop this? So I'm going to pray real quick and let you go. Sorry for going over time. Lord, we are a broken world and we are a broken people. And I ask that you forgive us for our complacency, that you forgive us for the actions that we have taken that have furthered trafficking in this world, that have furthered the objectification of your people. Lord, I ask that you work in our hearts first to change us to be people who are passionate and furious about slavery and about enslaving people, your people in this world. Change our hearts first to walk away from things like pornography and to walk away from the simple life where we don't think about your people on a broader scale. Change our hearts first, Lord, and then help us to pray for those who need their hearts changed. Help us to pray for the evil people, the people who have let sin and darkness take so much of themselves that they would take another human and that they would sell them and that they would abuse them and that they would use them only for their gain without thinking of them as other humans. Lord, break their hearts, but teach us how to pray for them. And finally, Lord, burden our hearts daily with your children and your women and your men who are enslaved. Never let them be far from our minds, Lord. Even as we go through our day and we live our lives, let us be burdened with their plight. Let us see the world through your eyes so that we can understand who needs you and how we can step in to do that. Lord, I lift all of this up to you, and I ask that you make us better people for your kingdom every day. In your name I pray, amen.